We're going to have another Q&A session with our speakers, and this time we're going to be led by Dr. Sandra Peter, who is Kai's partner in crime on the Future This Week podcast. And Sandra has like an encyclopedic knowledge of innovation in history. She's taught me about the tulip bubble and the kind of manure industry and things. So I always learn something when Sandra's around, so I'm sure we all will today as well. So I'll hand over to you, Sandra.
Thank you. And I will not take this opportunity to say shit again. I think that's why I always bring up the manure story, so that it gives me license to talk about all sorts of shit. I want to try to sum up a little bit of what we've heard, and thank you to all three presenters for doing such a wonderful job. I think quite often at disruption conferences, we tend to disrupt in the same way. So we always hear the story of the new Uber of something, or God help us, the new Juicero that will revolutionize something else, or a new technology. You know, this is about blockchain and how that's going to change everything from property to finance. And I think what we've tried to do this morning was to try to give you a different idea of disruption. And in the morning, we talked about this idea of uncomfortable disruption, disruption at the fringes. And now we continue to see a different view of disruption. Disruption is not only about the Ubers of the world and the Juiceros or the blockchain. It's also about things like translating what happens in the world of disruption from the fringe to the corporate. How do we tell these stories? How do we have the ability to tell stories that do not have constraints? How do we bring together the idea architect and the builder to tell the story within the organizations? How do we then bring boards, and boards are faced with disruptions, how do we make them able to try to make sense of uncertain situation and make them certain, or try to preempt what's happening in the disruption world? That is as much a story about disruption as the new Juicero. And in the end, we heard about the bigger picture. Disruption is also about these very large national narratives about disruption. China, how do we tell the story of what is happening there on a national level? How do we understand disruption at an industrial scale where we have companies that span a number of industries? And then how do we tell the story of disruption from a government perspective, and how we try to build policy around this? So please join me in trying to find out more from our wonderful presenters around the story of disruption. All right. So I will take audience questions because we have very little time, and I want to give you the opportunity to ask questions. I know I'm dying to have a few. I will try to keep them to the end of it. Yes, sorry, I can't see you, but at the back.
How many people should be on Star Trek?
How many people should be on Star Trek?
So how many people should be on the Star Trek Enterprise?
That would require a 6-week Capgemini-led bottom-up business case. McKinsey are too expensive.
I'm glad I'm sitting in the middle there.
Yeah. You can do the governance. Sorry, I don't know. Was that a serious question? Probably not.
What does it take to drive change? Like how many people does it take? What's the ingredient for that? You need 4,000, you need 4?
Oh, that's a cool question. I get it now. There's a
lose a lot of red shirts, so you need a lot of disposable members.
That's a good point. The fifth guy in the away party who gets murdered in the first 10 seconds. I think what you need is, there's this concept that everyone can be a change agent or everyone can be an innovator. Personally, I don't subscribe to that. There are some people who are naturally better at it. Now, the secret is to find the things that people are naturally best at and to put them in a role where they can do the best at it. So the governance angle is, how do you facilitate a culture and a structure which allows people to do that? So from my perspective, I'd love to be the ideas guy thinking about the future, doing that. But within the constraints of a corporate organization, I'm not able to do that all the time. And if I were, it would be hard to quantify the value. And unfortunately, you have to always quantify the value at some point. So the answer to that is, you pick the people who are good at things and you allow them to do that. You know, in a large organization that has scale issues and it's difficult to do, but the more you do that, the more effective you can be.
I think also, if I could add to that around the board table, I think the boards need to get the right balance between leadership and consensus. 2017, people want to be asked and they want to be led. And so leadership's about taking someone somewhere they didn't know they needed to go, and they're happy when they got there. So I think it's a combination of leadership, but you have to incorporate engagement in that piece.
Thank you.
Just particularly on China, I think a fascinating thing that's happening in the world at the moment is the barriers to entry that are being created by some of this disruption that's going on. And you know, would I go and build a new search engine today? Probably not. The barriers to entry to that market are quite large. I guess what China has with scale is this ability for companies like Alibaba to scale to a point that competitively, is there a point in the future where you can't compete against these things because they create such large barriers to entry through their scale?
Yeah, but I think that's a global debate, right, on the digital monopoly, right? So China, you know, they have so-called BAT, right? So Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent, right? In the US, they call it FANG, right? Facebook, Amazon, you know, Google, and Netflix, right? So in the digital economy, it's a very natural phenomenon, right, to have, you know, so-called winner takes it all dynamics, right? Because there's a huge network effect, right? And they feed into each other, right? And then there is also a good thing about, you know, that dynamics, because as you become big, you can take risk, right? You can make a huge bet on the future technology that is uncertain, right? But then at the same time, you know, they may abuse their power, right? And that's the big debate going on, you know, not just in China, but also around the world, right? So therefore, you know, there is a role for the policymaker and regulator to play, right? So make sure, right? So they have a good, you know, legal framework, whether that's, you know, competition law or commercial law or anti-monopoly law, right? So to see whether there is any abuse of power, right? Unfair competition, right? So that's probably one thing. And then second thing is to keep the entry barriers low, right? So the beauty of digital economy is that you can lose your business overnight, right? Because, you know, when it is so easy to switch, right? People will switch to a better service, right? So as long as the entry barrier is low and the newcomers can come in and then offer better service, right? You know, there could be, you know, massive switching, right? So depending on, you know, how competitive the new versus, you know, old business is, right? So therefore, you know, that's also another thing, you know, that regulators need to pay attention, right? Keep the entry barrier, you know, low. Yeah.
I think also boards need to look at the strategy of their organisations in that change and strategic alliances. I heard that YouTube, Twitter and Facebook got in a line at some point, call it You Twitface. Yeah. Can't beat that one, mate.
No, I was dynamite. No, I've got nothing.
I've got something. I think it's wonderful to have these ideas challenged, probably in the context of all these big corporations, but also in the context of what policy framework we put around it. But I think it's a good time to know that maybe also the time that we're all here for Disrupt, these are the moments when we challenge these ideas in the social space. So the role of these organizations is not just, you know, what can they achieve and what barriers can we put around them to make sure we're fine, but also it's around the social conversations we have about their role in society and whether they benefit us, or, you know, whether the new smart speaker in the phone is really a good idea and under what conditions and how we should relate to it, and how we should develop our notions of trust, for instance. So I think these sort of forums are a great moment to talk about the type of world we want to live in and how would we go about living in one of those. All right. Running.
Hi.
Yes.
Hi. I'm very interested in the idea that we can use data. That people have been worried about data being collected, you know, when you do shopping, when you watch online. And I recently tried to unsubscribe from Foxtel. And their big sales pitch to keep me, they kept me on the phone for like 20 minutes, trying really hard to get me to stay. And their big pitch was that you will lose access to the new season of Game of Thrones. And I thought, I've been a subscriber to Foxtel for 20 years, since day dot, and they don't have any idea of what my viewing patterns are. So if this is how people are using data, then, you know, I'm not so worried about the governance, because I just think, you know, there's a huge opportunity and no one's actually doing anything with it.
I think that from the governance side, it's a really interesting debate, but I'd be a bit concerned if they did inform you that what you'd been watching and sell directly into that and the breach of the Potential Privacy Act. So I know but this is where I think a lot of boards are not aligning the clarity of these items down to the salespeople. And I think it's a mixture of both aligning the governance and the outcome with the law, regulation down too. And I think that's where the boards need to do it.
And why are they collecting the data if they're...
Good question.
Well, I've gone for you there. We're all over trying to sell stuff to Foxtel to do that. The fact that they don't do it at the moment doesn't mean that we're not trying to sell them the ability to do so. Now, does anyone have people like you from Eubank? Anyone heard of people like you? It's a great thing. You go on, type in information, and it tells you what people like you do or spend in a particular area. That was set up by Eubank with no real use of the data. So the first step with data is you collect it, and then you work out what to do with it. And then you combine it with more enhanced data, analytics, behavior, things like that. The company you should look at is Cambridge Analytica. Heard of Cambridge Analytica?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Cambridge Analytica won the election for Donald Trump because they're able to take the information of who you are and what you do and where you go and tailor messages very specific to you and who you are. There's a reason why people voted for Brexit and Donald Trump. It's because they're morons. But that doesn't matter. A lot of people are morons. It's about getting the morons out to do it. And how do you get the morons out to do it? You use data. So the fact that Foxtel don't do it is Netflix don't release viewing information about anything. They don't release audience figures, they release nothing. But you can be damn sure they're tracking it. You can be damn sure they're using it for stuff. The link to China, I'll tee up here, is they are so far away ahead of us in terms of these things. WeChat, for example, if you don't understand WeChat is Facebook on steroids in 10 years. It's, the graph there doesn't explain how eponymous it is with everything. So if you look at two things today, look at Cambridge Analytica, look at WeChat, it's amazing. There you go, teed up beautifully.
Yeah, and on the data, right, and more broadly, I think there will be lots of trial and error, actions and reaction, and then there will be a lot more debates going forward, right? But then there are also good sides of using those data, right? For example, in China, right? So small, medium enterprise, they cannot get loans from bank because typically banks, they require collateral, like land, right? But then small, medium enterprise, they don't have those, right? Then how can they finance their new business ideas, right? But then, Alipay, right? So Alibaba, right? So they have all this transaction data, right? They know how much money this small company makes, right? And they can assess the risk better, right? Therefore, they can give micro lending to these SMEs, right? So same thing for individuals, right? In China, many people don't have the credit history. They cannot get a credit card, right? Especially people in rural areas, right? But then this payment platform, they don't use collateral, but they use something else to rate the risk better, right? And then give loans to these old people in need, right? So there are also a benefit of using those data, right, for a better society, right? So I think on this one, I think we need a lot more trial and error and debates.
One quick one just on that. Look past the financial data and look at behavioural data. Westpac have just bought a company that have an algorithm that asks questions which has nothing to do with finances. So what football team do you support? I support the Manly Seagulls. No loan, because they have... Is that on film? I mean nothing by that, it was just a random... It's because using the information of...
Manchester or something like that.
Wow, yeah.
I'd be careful during lunch.
Yeah, no, the message is by using the behavioural information, you get a better insight into people than actually using financial data. So the big leap forward is the finances don't really matter. That's what you check later. It's your behaviour which will then dictate whether you get a loan or not in the first place. It's happening. It's kind of cool, depending on what your behaviour is.
I would add to that that there are a lot of Australian companies that also do it. So for instance, Qantas currently has a valuation of about $9 billion, and about 5 billion of those 9 billion are not their aircraft, not what they do there, but the data they have on 11 million frequent flyer customers, and the ability to monetize that through insurance, through financing, through all these other products that they could put forward.
Counter to that would be to say that if Foxtel is selling that as part of their value proposition, then it's not true.
I'm most concerned about my internet service provider knowing that I watch Game of Thrones and I'm Foxtel. All right. One last question, or we are out of time.
Could you just share with us the top 3 Scottish innovations?
Oh, you've gone for that one. Everything. Wow. Television, telephone, fibre optics, tarmac, pneumatic tyre, condensing steam engine.
Just 3, mate. Just 3.
Fridge. Everything, man. Everything you do. Scottish. Golf, whiskey.
They're also the reason, Kai and I are here, Adam Smith, business schools.
Yeah, economics, thank you. Next.
Thank you so much. They're putting on the music from the Oscars, so we will need to get moving. Thank you so much again for your presentations and your insights today. Please contact them during lunch and during the subsequent time to ask all your burning questions. Thank you so much.
I wouldn't mind getting your slide.